I'm not going to answer the question.
Why would you answer that
because
question?
the question is, the question is,
Justice,
the
radical
question,
left.
will you shut up, man?
Listen.
Tempers flare in the first U.S. presidential debate. Hello, I'm Mike Walter, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. There is a long history of presidential debates in the United States, but perhaps none more contentious than the first between the incumbent, Donald Trump, and his challenger, former Vice President Joe Biden. Trailing in the polls, the president plowed through the debate rules, interrupting both the moderator and his opponent in an aggressive attempt to win new voters and solidify his base. There's much to talk about. Let's get straight to our panel. Ameshia Cross joins us from right here in Washington, D.C. She's a Democratic strategist and commentator. Steve Chaggaris is an analyst and the political editor for Al Jazeera Online. With us from New York is writer and conservative commentator Jadan Horyn. And joining us from the White House, he's my colleague, CGTN White House Correspondent Nathan King. Nathan, why don't we start with you? What do you make of the debate? I mean, we know that Biden was leading in these battleground states. Did this move voters in any of them, you think, into one column or the other?
Well, I mean, define movement. I mean, move to another country? Because I'm not joking. This was awful. You know it was awful. Everyone knows it was awful. This was not a good point in presidential debates. This was not a good point in presidential history. This was not a good point in politics, period, for this country. I mean, we know we've had a weird 4 years. We know we're in the midst of COVID and a re-election campaign. But this was just a train wreck. And, you know, what's really interesting is, you know, we're all journalists. We all like to be fair. I saw first reporting in the New York Times, Washington Post, elsewhere last night saying it's a contentious debate. Both people went at each other. We know what happened last night. Essentially, the sitting president of the United States hijacked the presidential debate, both from the moderator and his opponent, and did not stop talking, interrupting, and pushing. And, you know, I hate to use the word bully, but that's how it felt to a lot of people. I spoke to women today who felt threatened by it. My 13-year-old son had to go to bed. He wasn't enjoying it at all. This is a feeling that has been felt in households across America. Did Donald Trump win any votes? I don't know. But he may have stopped people from voting.
Well, let's talk about one of the exchanges that everyone seems to be talking about. This was when he was asked to denounce white supremacist groups. The vice president specifically talking about the Proud Boys. Let's listen to the exchange.
Sure.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it.
Do you want to call him? What do you want to call him? Give me a name. Give me a
White
name.
supremacists and
who would you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys. Stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem.
So the Proud Boys, there was a lot of blowback about that. Even Senator Tim Scott said he thinks he made a mistake in his response. He did sort of backpedal on that a bit today, didn't he?
Yeah, you know, all the focus has been on this sort of stand down and stand by. For me, the real line is, what do you want me to call them? He knows what to call them. It's easy. White supremacists. But he won't do it. And the thing is that we saw this before. It's not new. We've seen it with Charlottesville. We've seen it elsewhere. The fact that this is a surprise to people is not shocking. What's shocking is it happened during a presidential debate, and it was an easy thing for the US president to say, and he didn't. Now, you're right about the Proud Boys. They celebrated online. We are standing down and standing by, sir. On his way out to campaign in Minnesota, a state he really wants to pick up if he's going to lose some of the states that he won in 2016. He said, I don't know who the Proud Boys are. I've never heard of them. Of course, yeah, let law enforcement do the job. Stand down, guys. He's heard of the Proud Boys. We know this. So it's just dog whistle one moment, disavow when you see rhetoric and obviously outcry from the public and the media. I've seen it from Helsinki. We saw it after Charlottesville. This is not new. We're just constantly shocked it's still going on.
Well, we certainly expected the coronavirus to come up in the discussion, and Jadan, it did. The vice president seizing on it. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The president has no plan. He hasn't laid out anything. He knew all the way back in February how serious this crisis was. He knew it was a deadly disease. What did he do? He's on tape as acknowledging he knew it. He said he didn't tell us or give people a warning of it because he didn't want to panic the American people. You don't panic. He panicked.
Jadan, this is an issue that, that voters really care about. How vulnerable is the president when it comes to the coronavirus?
I think the president is uniquely vulnerable when it comes to coronavirus, but I will say this, it was rather rich last night to see that kind of prep talking point from the vice president, given his own record with coronavirus. And I will also say this, that we need to be objectively fair when it comes to what the president attempted to do in the early parts of this outbreak. He attempted and he threatened to shut down travel from New York to other parts of the country, and our governor here memorably said that if you do so, that would be a violation of the Constitution. You are a president, I'm a governor, you're not a dictator. And I think, you know, many Americans understand that there is a federal strategy that has been done in conjunction with many governors, and governors have made different decisions. I don't think the American people want a national cohesive strategy in the sense that they want national mask mandates and nationalized shutdowns. And I think that, you know, that is what Biden was winking and nodding towards, and he was actually unable to say that he would do those things and didn't bring that up. So while the president is vulnerable on this, I wouldn't say that it's something that that voters are going to look at this debate and think that Biden had a strength on. I would say this particular segment was definitely a draw.
Yeah, and Jadan, to your point, the president did defend his record. We want to play an excerpt that he has and one from Biden. Let's play them back to back, and then I want to get your reaction on the backside.
We're weeks away from a vaccine. We're doing therapeutics already. Fewer people are dying when they get sick. Far fewer people are dying. We've done a great job.
Under this president, we become weaker, sicker, poorer, more divided, and more violent.
Both candidates pretty direct in their statements towards the voters. How do you think this shook out?
So I think both of those lines, one provides hope. The president was cheerleading a vaccine. Certainly, if it was any other president, we would be congratulating them for the innovation of the American workforce and what they've done. I think this single-handedly is Biden's best line. I saw as Trump was speaking that he deliberately and slowly wrote this down. Had this been what the voters saw last night from Joe Biden the entire debate, then they would have come away with the confidence that Joe Biden could be president. But Donald Trump had one objective last night, and that was to show that Biden no longer has the Constitution to be president of the United States. And I think, unfortunately, the former vice president demonstrated that he was rattled and lost his cool a couple times. And frankly, that is why so many independent voters, as a result of this debate, were turned off, because they did not see leadership either from our incumbent, but they certainly didn't see it from his opponent.
And Ameshia, I think Chris Wallace is younger than Biden. He was rattled as well. Give me your take on how this all shook out and your thoughts on the back and forth.
Well, the debate in and of itself was complete and utter chaos. Donald Trump came into that debate doing exactly what he planned to do. He wasn't trying to expand his base. He was he was speaking directly to white supremacists. He wasn't going to try to shut them down. He knows who they are. He knows their names. He knows the white supremacist groups. And he knows that white supremacy is the greatest domestic terrorism threat in this country. But more importantly, what Donald Trump came to do was to try to shake, rattle, and roll Joe Biden. He didn't come to talk policy. He didn't come to talk about the economy. He didn't come to talk about COVID-19. He had one objective in mind, and it was to quake Joe Biden, specifically because Donald Trump, even before the debate last night, he had gone on a tirade about wanting to have Joe Biden take a drug test. He wanted him to take a urine sample. He wanted and then he spread a conspiracy theory about people, giving Joe Biden answers, feeding them through his ear during the debate. There was a lot going on prior to the debate that was also questionable, but during the debate in and of itself, what Donald Trump did was showcase his brute nastiness. He showcased that he can hit below the belt, which is something we're used to. He did it in 2016 during the debates, not only the Republican primary, but also his debates against Hillary Clinton. And we've also seen him be the bully on Twitter 24/7. But what he did last night really changed the tone and the temper, because it evaded and helped to avoid what I would consider what could have been, based on the topical substance of 10 to 12 topics that I think were important, it could have been a very substantive debate, and it did not turn out that way, solely because Donald Trump decided to attack, not really answer any questions friendly, and bring up Hunter Biden at every single chance that he could get, even though Hunter Biden is not on the ballot anywhere. Hunter Biden is not a part of Joe Biden's campaign, and all of the allegations that Donald Trump made against him have all been proven wanting. So it was very interesting that was a line of questioning that he would go down, but he did it because he didn't want Joe Biden to be able to speak. Donald Trump was able to take control of the debate, specifically because he didn't follow any of the debate rules that were passed on to his campaign and every single campaign leader who's ever debated. And he also he was there to literally shake up the former vice president, specifically because Joe Biden performed well in an environment that was hell on wheels. And for Donald Trump, someone who had basically set this whole thing up to make the bar so low for Joe Biden, Sleepy Joe, calling him senile, saying all of these things about him. And honestly, for a lot of people, if Joe Biden showed up and gave a complete sentence, that would have been a win. So I think that last night showcased that Joe Biden, even though he got rattled a couple of times, again, if somebody is shaking and quaking at you for an hour and a half, I don't think any of us would not get rattled at least twice, especially when you're attacking somebody's family. But I do think that, he came out of it as best as he could. He did deliver some policy jabs, and he also delivered some what I would consider much needed jabs against Donald Trump. But all in all, last night was complete and utter chaos, totally disrespectful to America and the democracy for which it stands.
Steve, I don't like to make predictions, but I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say when historians look back on the great moments in American history, this will not make the list. It really was difficult to watch. I was reading Twitter as I was watching it. One said, this is an embarrassment for the nation. Another said, somebody give Chris Wallace a taser. Another said, I've been watching 32 minutes of this. This is the worst debate I've ever watched in my entire life. So the question is, what was the objective last night? Was it to just turn off voters? We know about 100 million didn't vote in the last election who could. Or was it to really galvanize the base, or was it to do both?
Okay.
Well, to be honest with you, I have to say I might be the least shocked person of anybody, at least from what I've heard in terms of analysis post-debate, because this is Donald Trump. This is what we've seen from this man since he jumped in the race. He plowed, bulldozed through the Republican primary debates in 2015 and 2016 with the same behavior, and he acted the same way during the general election debates with Hillary Clinton. The difference is the political environment, the foundation is completely different now than it was in 2016. He was an outsider. He was competing against somebody in a general election who generally was as much unliked as he was. People might have been a little bit, interested in perhaps a little change of pace after Obama for 8 years. But now this is about Donald Trump. It's about his stewardship of the government, of his administration, of his presidency. And it is a referendum of Donald Trump. And so as much as he tried to bulldoze his way through the debate last night to make this about Biden, at the end of the day, people are going to judge Donald Trump for the things that he is saying, for how he's governing the country. And it's not clear that he made any progress on that front to speak to voters about the issues that voters seem to care about right now. Coronavirus, racial justice issues, the economy. I mean, it seemed like whenever he was asked about his own record, yes, on coronavirus, he tried to tout the great things that he did. But at the same time, there is still a record that people aren't happy with. The polling has shown for months that people have disapproved of his handling of coronavirus. And he's trying very hard to focus on the positive. But it's like any crisis and any leader dealing with any crisis. If you don't have much to show for it at the end of the day, people are going to judge you on that. And I think he finds himself in a situation where he needs to change the dynamic, but doing it by trying to shift it onto Biden and trying to make Biden the Hillary Clinton of 2020, it doesn't seem to be working out for him right now. And I'm not sure that what happened last night is really the answer either.
So, Nathan, there's been fallout. The Presidential Commission that sets the ground rules for this sort of thing said that they're going to add more structure to the remaining debates. But the question has to be, is it too little too late? I mean, as you pointed out, a lot of people were turned off by this. Will they even come back and watch another debate? And then secondly, I want to ask you, what about the relationship the rest of the world has with the United States. I mean, this is really their kind of insight into the U.S. It was not a good look for the United States last night.
Well, the statement, if you read it from the Presidential Debate Commission, was like being flogged by a wet lettuce. I mean, it really didn't really say anything. And, you know, they've said the idea of maybe to cut the mics of people who go on too long. Look, if you cut Donald Trump's mic, it still would have been picked up by Joe Biden's mic, Chris Wallace's mic. Everyone would have known he was in the room. It just would have looked like you were trying to silence him. It's going to be very, very difficult. Essentially, we have one person just not agreeing with the rules, and that's Donald Trump. Now, that's fine. That's his strategy. It didn't necessarily do him any favors. Joe Biden's campaign was suggesting, look, if we'd said at the beginning of the night that we would seem to make Donald Trump erratic, not on point, and basically a bully, we would have thought we won. Well, he did that all on his own. As opposed to the international reaction. I think this is really important. And, you know, a lot of Americans sort of downplay this, of course. It's the biggest economy in the world, biggest military power. But, you know, it's very inward-looking, especially at the moment in their politics. The headlines around the world were just terrible. You know, from the UK to Ukraine, from Canada to China, they were awful. You know, Wolf Blitzer, I think, from CNN said, oh, well, Russia and China are going to be looking at this and saying our systems are better. No, they're not. They're really worried because, you know, Russia and China don't need to interfere in US elections because the US body politic screws it up on its own. It's been doing that for 20 or 30 years, and this is why we're ending up with this. In fact, the world is worried. China, Russia, the European Union, they want a stable power politically. They want a predictable country. This is not what we saw in the last 12 hours. Of course, it's not a great advertisement for democracies, but there are great other advertisements for democracies around the world this year, from New Zealand to elsewhere. So, you know, the fact that the US can't end in the top 5 this year of a democracy with this horrible debate will have reverberations, especially as the last 4 years of foreign policy have frayed alliances from Asia to Europe and beyond.
Jadan, of course, the U.S. president would much rather not talk about the coronavirus. He'd rather focus on law and order. He did so last night. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The Democrats that run these cities don't want to talk like you about law and order.
Violent
and you
crime,
still haven't mentioned.
Violent
Are you
crime.
in favor of law and order?
I'm in favor of law. You following
Are you
it
in favor of law and order? Go
yes,
ahead.
I'm in favor.
You asked a question, let him finish.
Law and order. Law and order.
Let him answer.
Law and order with justice, where people get treated fairly. Okay. And the fact of the matter is, violent crime went down 17%, 15% in our administration.
All right.
It's gone up on his watch.
Went down much more in ours.
Jadan, do you score any points in the law and order category?
I think the president scored points on law and order, but not in this particular exchange. I think on the exchange where he asked the former vice president, who had previously said that he is the Democratic Party, why or if he had reached out to elected officials and governors and mayors. And Joe Biden demurred, rather perplexingly. I think it would have been a very strong opportunity for the vice president to say, yes, I've called them, I've used moral capital to say that, you know, we need to ensure that people are safe and there's not violence. And instead, he said rather weakly, and I would find most perplexing, that as a no longer being in office, that is not his job or his role. And so I think on that, the president scored that I don't think he would have otherwise done so. And that's to be, again, very objective on this. You know, it is very concerning for suburban voters. It's very concerning for conservatives when it comes to seeing the lawlessness that has occurred, especially in Portland, which was brought up. And to see the former author of the '94 crime bill and a former vice president say that he hadn't reached out to the mayor of Portland or the governor of Oregon is, again, just perplexing, because it just is such an easy win, or a commitment to do so would be an easy win, and he just let it on the table.
So, Ameshia, let me ask you about this law and order issue. He's obviously trying to get the suburban voters, as Jadan pointed out, and he did win that little group in 2016. It helped him win the election. 2018, of course, with the Democratic wave, it swung in the other direction. Is this a message that's going to resonate with the people in the suburbs, do you think?
Well, I'm hopeful that it won't, because as Joe Biden pointed out last night, the suburbs, when Donald Trump thinks suburbs, he thinks white people. When he talks about suburbs, he's talking about white suburban women, and particularly running fear tactics and fear campaign strategies to make them scared of African Americans who are protesting for their rights across this country. So when I hear, and when other people of color hear Donald Trump say law and order, we automatically know what that dog whistle means. He's utilizing the very few instances of extremism during some protests as extrapolating it on the whole. 93% of the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd protests were peaceful. And I do want to make that clear, 93%, the overwhelming majority. But what Donald Trump has done and what he thinks that he can do, because historically in America it has always worked, is that he can run a fear campaign specifically designed to scare white women. The same women that we see call the police when a black man is walking his dog in the park. The same people that we see call the police when the bird watcher is in New York, a Harvard grad, just watching the birds. And I think that there's something to be said about this innate fear that is continually drummed up over the course of American history, specifically geared towards white women, that politicians have been very good at, conservative politicians have been very good at creating over time. And Donald Trump is following that playbook. Do I think that it's going to work? Only time will tell. But I will say that the suburbs of 2020 are very different than the suburbs of the 1980s. There are more minorities who live in the suburbs today than who did even 5 years ago. So this play that he's trying to make is very interesting, considering that a lot of the suburbs are also very diverse. So these white women have neighbors that are black, that are Latino. Their kids go to school and carpool with people who don't look like them. So it's a very interesting line of questioning and line of thought for the president to use in America that looks much different than the one he happens to be targeting.
Steve, I want to ask you a question about optics, because I was in Boston for the 2000 debate between Gore and Bush, and everybody there, all the journalists who watched that debate, walked away saying Gore won this hands down. And yet, as the days progressed, more and more was coming out about, oh, Gore was disrespectful, he did all this, rolled his eyes, that sort of thing. And I was thinking about that last night. When Biden was calling the president a clown, a liar, a racist, he also was kind of rolling his eyes. Is there any chance there's a blowback for that, you know, in terms of that as the days progress for Biden?
I mean, sure, there's a chance for that. We don't know, we don't really have what the sentiment of voters are following this. There were some polls done immediately after the debate, but those, you know, those are sort of snap polls, and you get a little bit of a sense. But it's not going to be for another week or so before we get a real sense of how people are reacting to all of this. And I think at that point, we'll really see how Donald Trump and Joe Biden's performance affected, if at all, how people feel about the candidates. I do want to make a point about the law and order thing, which is interesting. You talked about the suburbs. Let's remember that it was less than a month ago when there was violence in the suburbs in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and both Trump and Biden used that as a moment to deal with the law and order issue. Trump saw that as an opportunity to try to make that really the poster child for his law and order message. And what's happened is, in the wake of that, the polling has shown that it's not really working. It's not working in Wisconsin, and it's not working around the country. And in fact, when people are asked, when voters are asked, who do they think would be better to handle these kinds of issues, they say Joe Biden. And so it's just interesting to me that you see Trump still talking a little bit about law and order, but it's not the main thrust of his strategy as it was 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I think Kenosha was a wake-up call to Trump and some of his strategists to realize that this may not be the thing that helps him over the top in suburbs. And
Nathan, I want your thoughts on this optics question.
Yeah, I think Steve's made some excellent points. I just want to go back to the polling for a second. I don't know if you saw it, but Tim Alberta, who's probably written the best book ever on the Republican Party in the last few decades, and Frank Luntz, who is known as an amazing Republican pollster, had this amazing focus group in Pennsylvania. And there was this woman who just basically, who was undecided, and just said, Trump looked like a crackhead. And it was just incredible that in the swingiest of states that Trump really needs, that this lady would come out and say that in this very targeted focus group that some of the biggest experts in the Republican Party had put together. When it comes to law and order, I think Steve is absolutely right. This was a missile that did not hit. And I think going back to the previous arguments about the suburbs not looking like they were, but also the fact is it's just not true. The 93% that we mentioned of protests being peaceful. People aren't feeling threatened in their homes. There are not mass riots. The sheriff in Portland did not support the president, as he pointed out today. All this stuff may work on a Fox News viewer, which is fine. That's where the base is. That's where some of the swingiest areas will watch. But it's not true. And I think it goes back to the point that Steve made at the beginning of the show, that if you don't have good arguments, and let's face it, there weren't new ones last night from the US president, then you end up losing something.
And Nathan, of course, there are real concerns here in Washington about whether or not the president of the United States is going to accept the results if they go in the favor of Biden. He talked about that last night. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I am urging my people. I hope it's going to be a fair election. If it's a fair
You're
election,
urging them what?
I am 100% on board. But if I see tens of thousands of ballots being manipulated, I can't go along with that. And I'll tell you what,
does that
from
mean,
a common sense,
does that mean you're going to tell your people to take to the
It means you have a fraudulent election. You're sending out 80 million ballots. They're not equipped to. These people aren't equipped to handle it. Number one. Number two, they cheat.
He has no idea what he's talking about. Here's the deal. The fact is, I will accept it, and he will too. You know why? Because once the winner is declared, after all the ballots are counted, all the votes are counted, that'll be the end of it.
So, Nathan, give me your sense of what kind of wild ride the U.S. is in for on November 3rd.
We're not going to have a result on November 3rd or 4th. That's the answer. And it's partly due to because of the coronavirus and lots of mail-in ballots. There is no any evidence of fraud in the past. If the states handle it well, there won't be any evidence of fraud either. This president has been questioning for weeks because he knows if it's a large turnout election, he will probably lose, and it depends on a few swing states. The big problem is every state has slightly different rules. Some are rushing them in. There are going to be a few mistakes. Some ballots will be lost. The problem is, for me, as a journalist, and for you, Mike, remember this, we're covering election night, guess which states don't start counting mail-in ballots until the polls close? It is Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and others. So if it's close, we are not going to get a result potentially for days, if not a week, because some states say if you send in your ballot on November 3rd, we've got about 6 or 7 days. This window of opportunity for the president to muddy the results, whatever they are, or for others to get in with legal challenges, is a very dangerous moment. I don't want to underestimate this because there is a lot of energy going into questioning the votes, not just on the Republican side, but also on the Democratic side as well. You think 2000 was a bad election? This could be worse.
Well, we're going to have a long night, as will Steve. I want to thank our guests. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Mike Moulter in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for joining us.